I think, again, I'm going to record this for those who are not able to join us today, but maybe I will hand it over to you, Stanislav, to introduce yourself briefly, and then we can get into our presentation and discussion.
Yes, thank you so much for this opportunity to talk, to share. Yes, I'm Stanislav Tsinjitov, and from the Russian Far East, from particular Khabarovsk Krai. It's close to the border with China, close to North Korea. Yeah, and I'm an entrepreneur and volunteering for the Association of Indigenous Peoples of the North of the Khabarovsk region. And my presentation will cover more well-being of Russian small-numbered indigenous peoples of the North Siberia and the Far East through demography, health, metabolism, and socio-cultural adaptation. So it will be like more particular about those things, because I didn't want to spend so much time, your time actually, about art, and because it will cost so much time. This is just thing. So let me start. Okay, here we go. Can you hear? Can you see this slide, right?
Yes.
Perfect. All right. So according to Russian federal law on the general principles of organizing community of indigenous small-numbered peoples of the North Siberia and the Far East of the Russian Federation, indigenous small-numbered peoples include peoples living in the territories of traditional residence of their ancestors, preserving an original way of life numbering less than 50,000 people in Russia and recognizing themselves as independent ethnic communities. From 1926 to 1993, the aborigines of the Russian North included 26 peoples of different origins, languages, and cultures, spread over vast territories from Chukotka to the Kola Peninsula, and from the coast of the Arctic Ocean to the Amur River. Since 1993, the list has expanded rapidly. By 2000, it already included 40 groups, which were also recorded in 2002 census. And many of the 40 new small-numbered peoples inhabit the southern regions of Siberia. Some of them were previously included in other groups. In 2005, the status of indigenous small-numbered people was granted to the Izhmat Komi, with their total number of 15,607 people settled in the north of the Komi Republic, as well as on the Kola Peninsula and the West Siberia. By census 2010, the number of indigenous small-numbered people has been already 247,441 people. In accordance with the Constitution of 1993, the territory of the Russian Federation includes more than 80 territorial administrative entities designated in descending order of autonomy as a republic, province, region, and autonomous okrug. They in turn are divided into administrative territorial units, districts, localities, and most often I'll mention the autonomous districts located in the northern regions of the country, like national administrative territorial entities. Until 1980, they were called national districts. Their formation began in 1929, 1932. This was an attempt to find compromise between the needs of the industrial development of the territories and the support of indigenous population engaged in traditional spheres of economy. Administratively, an autonomous okrug is part province or region and formally represents the territory of the traditional residents of certain ethnic group. However, due to the intensive influx of migrants to the north, the proportion indigenous people in the districts was rapidly declining. By 1989, it reached 4%. And today, the autonomous okrugs are virtually indistinguishable from other administrative units of the Russian Federation in terms of population. Therefore, they, as well in republics, territories, and regions, distinguish areas of residence of distinct indigenous small number peoples. However, in these territories, aborigines are minority, and in the Murmansk region, for example, in 2005, the Sami people accounted for only 1.5% of the total population of the corresponding district. These features of the administrative division of territories create serious difficulties when trying to assess a number of socioeconomic characteristics of the indigenous northerners. The problem is that collection published by Eurostat and it's remain still only one source of official information, contained data related to the entire population of the areas where indigenous small population live. It's clear that assessment based on these publications, for example, of the health indicators of indigenous people will be very inaccurate. Indigenous peoples of the North, Siberia, and Far East, it's just political term that unites people of different origins, languages, and cultures. The anthropological diversity is pretty diverse, and the medical anthropological features and genetic characteristics from the distribution of blood groups in the ABO system to the markers of mitochondrial DNA and the Y chromosome pretty different. These differences are not only theoretical significance, they are also important for practical medicine. For example, the Amur Orochi are closer to Yakuts, Buryats, and peoples of South Asia than Chukchi or Siberian Eskimos in terms of frequencies of ADH1B47, his allele, that determines one of the stages of alcohol metabolism. This means that the genetic basis of the reaction to alcohol in different groups of native northerners significantly differ. An idea of the linguistic diversity of the groups of interest can be gleaned from the slide. The cultures of the people of the north are also diverse. Even the inhabitants of the circumpolar zone, whose traditional way of life was based almost entirely on the exploitation of wildlife resources, practice various forms of nature management, from specialization in sea trapping to cattle breeding. The cultural types formed in different natural zones, different in the degree of orientation to the consumer and producer economy. For example, first, specialized sea hunters like Eskimos, coastal Chukchi, coastal Korea groups lived in permanent settlements. The economic activity was based on seasonal hunting of seals and walruses on the ice and rookeries, whale hunting from canoes. Seasonal or occasional hunting of sea animals was also practiced by some group of Sami, Nenets, and Deven, who are mainly herders and deer hunters, in order to provide themselves with material for making belts and shoes. Second, the tundra reindeer hunters. This type of economy in ancient time was widespread through the north of Eurasia until a relatively recent time, 17th, 19th century. It was preserved among the tundra Yukagirs, Even, Ganasan, tundra nets, and some group of Sami people. Third one, the basis of economy of taiga hunters and fishermen was hunting for deer, elk, mountain sheep, and fishing in rivers and lakes with the spread of reindeer hunting. Many groups became semi-nomadic or nomadic, but their reindeer breeding retained its transport character, and wild ungulates continued to be the main source of meat and skins. Hanti, Manti, and Kete lived sedentary along riverbanks. Fourth, just reindeer herders. The economy is based on breeding large hundreds and thousands of herds of reindeer. They constantly migrate with herds to new untrodden pastures. Some groups like mountain Sami, Nets make seasonal migration from the taiga zone to the tundra and back. Others like Chukchi Koryaks go from the tundra to the sea coast in the summer. At the beginning of 20th century, the indigenous Aboriginal population was numerically predominant in most circumpolar regions of Russia, but during the last century, the northern territories of USSR were extremely intensively populated by natives from other regions. And as a result, as early as the first third of the 20th century, the indigenous North, while remaining in the traditional place of settlement, were suddenly transformed into ethnic minorities. And in less than a decade, between 1926 and 1935, the share in national districts of northern Russia dropped from 56% to 35%, and by 1970 it reached already 14%, and then by 1989 it was only 4%. Even after collapse of Soviet Union and the exodus of large part of the population from circumpolar zone, 7% of the population, or 11 million people, still live there. So it's far more than in North America, for example. But despite the decline in the relative proportion of the Aboriginal population, over the past 80 years, its absolute number that has steadily increased. The decreased population volumes of some peoples in 1959 as compared to 1926, for example, the Etelman and Evenks, and their abrupt changes, such a 12-fold increase in the number of silkups and 4-fold increase for Evenks, are for the most part not related to demographic factors. The main reason were changes of names of some administrations. It was in some cases influenced by voluntaristic decisions of local authorities. A significant part of the Etelmen, for example, in the 1930s, 70s were registered as the Kamchadals, merging them with the Russian old age population of Kamchatka. Non-demographic changes in the sites of indigenous population are largely due to the influence of economic and social factors. Among them is the presence of certain benefits provided to representatives of small peoples, for example, rights or preference for the use of certain territories or resources, quotas and scholarships for higher education, etc. Of course, the general rights of ethnic consciousness, characteristic of the modern world and Russia in particular, plays an important role. But now let's emphasize another essential point. From the post-war years until the late 80s of last century, the basic demographic indicator of the small peoples of the North and the Far East remained positive on the whole, and the credit for this goes without doubt to the healthcare system. By 1988-89, the average life expectancy of indigenous Northerners had reached 60 years. This is the best demographic indicators achieved by the people of the Russian North, and they are largely due to the social changes of the previous decades. The Northern Aborigines traditionally practiced relatively late marriages, which naturally limited the fertile period of women and the number of children she gave birth to. This custom can be regarded as a social adaptation to the conditions of nomadic life, like too young mother could not provide her child with proper protection and care. The tendency for the modern world to reduce the number of children in Aboriginal populations has already become quite evident. But the typical tendency for urbanized groups to delayed parenthood, the shift of firstborn children to older ages is not yet present. In general, both the features of reproductive behavior of Russian Northerners and the statistical and demographic indicators indicate a gradual transition to the planned nature and reproduction and birth control. By the first year of 21st century, the birth rate of indigenous Northerners in Russia had almost halved compared to the mid 80s. Combined with a relatively high infant mortality rate and slightly increased total mortality rate, this led to a significant slowdown in the natural increase of Northerners, although it remained positive. But since 2002, the natural increase of the Aboriginal population began to increase. And by 2008, it reached 12.7 per 1,000. The positive dynamics was ensured by decrease in the total and infant mortality rates. In 2000, for example, the total mortality of Northern was almost twice lower than national average and stabilized at first and then increased birth rate. In 2006, it exceeded the Russian average by 1.7 times. The reduction of life expectancy of Northerners is strongly influenced by external causes, injuries, accidents, poisonings, murders, and suicides. In the overall mortality structure of the indigenous population of the Russian North, they occupy the second place, and in some regions they even come out on top. The increase in the birth rate led to noticeable rejuvenation of the northern Aborigines, while the share of the older population, 60 years old and older, is very small. As a result, the age pyramid of Russian northern Aborigines has a wide base, like many children, relatively high birth rate, a rapid narrowing in the middle part, influence of relatively high mortality, a small volume of the upper part. Elderly people are few people live to old age. Metabolic health. In numerous publications devoted to nutrition in northern indigenous peoples, researchers have pointed out waste pride disorders in the assimilation of some dietary sugars. Among the numerous variants of the primary genetically determined disaccharidase deficiency, the best known is low tolerance for milk sugar or lactose. It should be pointed out that the term low tolerance for lactose covers several different phenomena, including the primary, like genetically determined, and secondary acquired hyperlactasia. The primary hyperlactasia characteristic of the majority of northern people declares itself through the NH-related decrease in the production of the enzyme lactase. This is no disease, but genotype-determined variation of the norm. Early studies based on clinical analysis with lactose load failed to provide an accurate picture of the distribution of the gene, determining primary hyperlactasia, previously called LACR, or lactase restriction. However, the differential diagnosis of primary and secondary hyperlactasia presents a difficulty, especially under polyclinical or field conditions. Misdiagnosis has resulted in mistakes being made in calculating gene frequencies. In terms of anthropology and medicine, the primary hyperlactasia problem may be described as follows. All healthy children under 1.5 to 2 years of age retain a high ability for splitting lactose. With age and depending on the individual's genotype, the enzyme production may decrease. Given the lactase deficiency, the complex molecule of milk sugar fails to break down into glucose and galactose and cannot be digested by the organism. As a result, eating foods containing large amounts of lactose, for example, whole milk, causes indigestion, nausea, and diarrhea. The genetically determined lactose activity level is formed between 2 and 21 years of age, and it's retained afterwards. For most representatives of the far north population, an early age by the age of 4, 6, and rapid decrease in enzyme production is characteristic and normal feature of the physiology of digestion. In evolutionary terms, primary hypolactasia is a basic norm not only in Homo sapiens, but also in mammals as a whole. The enzyme deficiency forces the young age at certain age to reject the mother's milk and progress to independent food search. This increases the mother's chances of successfully feeding the next set of offspring. Due to interwoven effects of various ecological and cultural factors, the selection pressure in some human populations had resulted in a strengthening of a genotype characterized by the retention in older age of infant ability to digest lactose. For most people, the age-related decrease in lactase activity level remains to be prevalent norm. This being said, we cannot regard signs of hypolactasia in Arctic natives as a sign of abnormal metabolic health. The maldigestion of lactose is more widespread in high latitude groups than in non-Arctic population. One of the well-investigated genes participating in lipid metabolism regulation is APOE. This gene codes the activity of upper lipoprotein E, which plays a central role in binding fats, forming lipoproteins, and facilitating lipid transport within tissues. There are three common APOE gene alleles: E2, E3, and E4. The frequency of the APOE E4 allele in the modernized population ranges between 8–15%. However, in hunters-gatherers, it's much higher and reaches even 20–40%. The share of APO E3 allele carries according lower in these groups. Equally high, 21–31% is the frequency of APOE E4 allele in the Arctic population of Greenland, Alaska, Inuit, Sami, and Hunter Western Siberia. Studies in the populations of Europe, the US, Japan, and other countries have shown that APOE4 allele carries is a risk factor in the development of coronary artery disease and Alzheimer's disease. But in hunter-gatherer communities, no harmful effects of APOE4 have been revealed. Such differences between the representatives of modernized traditional communities could have been interpreted in favor of the idea that natives are naturally protected against the diseases of civilization. But for one reservation, in physically active representative of the modern urban population, the lipid profile does not depend on the APOE genotype. In other words, the individual is high level of physical activity balances the negative action of protein APOE. Based on this and similar consideration, we are inclined to think that the resistance of native northerners or cardiovascular diseases depends mainly on environmental and lifestyle factors, especially diet and level of physical activity. The decline in the consumption of traditional foods and the growing share of market products have resulted in an increase of serum cholesterol level in native inhabitants of the Arctic coast. Lipid metabolism is also subject to the influence of social conditions, environmental stressors, and the level of physical activity. Observations conducted in various circumpolar countries, including Russia, confirmed that the natives are subject to the pressure of such adverse changes in their lifestyles. These factors can essentially influence the lipid profile of northerners, increasing the risk of atherosclerosis development. Owing to the interpopulation mixtures within the native northern communities, the LCT gene genotype concentration rapidly increases. Phenotypically, its action shows itself in retaining the lactase activity in adults, and in itself, this character is neutral or even favorable. But milk sugar contributes to the increase of cholesterol level in the blood. These and similar genetic processes can aggravate metabolic health disturbance in northern population. The traditional social organization of northern peoples of the Arctic is oriented towards not only building interpersonal relations, but also in maintaining balance with extremely fragile environment. Through the history of traditional northern communities, modifications in their social structure followed various changes in the Arctic ecosystem. In other words, the rate of social changes is correlated to the rate of basic biological processes. As a result, the polar biome remained tranquil by the cultural and technological innovations in native communities, even at a time of major climatic changes. Should be said that the higher the social modernization level, the more pronounced the northerners' stress reaction to the environment to which they adapt to themselves. On the whole, social maladaptation is known to be associated with the idea of hopelessness of the current situation and with indifference towards one's own life and health. On the contrary, an orientation towards maintaining one's health and leading a healthy life is characteristic of successfully adapted individuals and groups who have clear and positive vision of the future. So it leads to consider the issues concerning the northerners' attitudes towards smoking and alcohol. So smoking. The northerners of Russia start to smoke pretty early. According to the inquiry conducted in 2005 in the village of Lovozero of Murmansk Oblast, the center of Sami settlement in Russia, the average age for beginning to smoke, it was like 2.5 years in boys and 13 years in girls. But the intensity of smoking is high for girls, like 8 cigarettes a day on average, and compared to 6 cigarettes for boys. The attitude towards smoking in representative of indigenous northerners, Sami and Komi, and in Russians of Lovozero is identical. The self-rated health is also very similar. Despite smoking, the majority of respondents consider their own health to be good or satisfactory. The proportion of smoking among adult northerners of Russia is very high too. Problem drinking and alcoholism. Representative of small indigenous population of Russia belong to different anthropological groups. So they inhabited the Arctic and subarctic regions at different times, and the gene pools of these populations are far from identical. The chemistry of intoxication and the biological basis for the development of alcoholic disease are very complex and are controlled by a group of genes, the distribution of which varies considerably in different populations. The intensity of flush reaction and alcohol tolerance is associated with the carriage of specific genes. The best known of the distribution of ADH1B47 and ADH2 alleles. The frequencies of these alleles in Arctic natives are the same as in the people of Central and Northern Europe, but different from the population in the south of East Asia. In particular, the ADH2 allele is not present in northerners, and the concentration of ADH1B47 is very slow. So it can be assumed that the atypical reaction to alcohol by the high latitude inhabitants is controlled by some other lots, or that has a different biochemical base compared with that of the South Asian type. As for the rapid development of alcoholic dependence in the native high latitude regions, it's probably caused by specificity of the biochemical process. It was a long time ago noticed by researchers that the ethanol metabolism in the northerners is rather slow, and ethanol concentration remains high for longer period and considerably exceeds the normal level for Europeans. However, no concrete concept has been offered so far for the explanation of this phenomenon. When dietary fats are absorbed in the blood, plenty of chylomicrons are produced, which reduce the steroid production in the adrenal glands. As a result, the amount of stress hormones like corticosteroids decrease in the blood. Thus, the protein-lipid diet produces an anti-stress effect. Giving up the traditional protein lipid diet may contribute to the development of growing thirst for alcohol in Northerners. The reduced share of fats in diet leads to high concentration of corticosteroids and accordingly to high level of anxiety. For many people, alcohol becomes a habitual way to relieve this anxiety. Besides, the ethanol coming from outside provides a shunt pathway for the energy supply through citric acid cycle. The relaxation of tension occurs not only because of mediated ethanol action on the above-mentioned opioid receptors, but also because of increased energy supply. Each gram of ethanol provides like 7 kilocalories of energy. These biological characteristics of Northerners can account for more than 9–10% of alcohol users in the problem of drinking and alcoholic dependence categories. It may be assumed that the early development of alcoholic dependence and the rapidly progressing alcoholism, both in men and women, characteristic in particular for the native peoples of Chukotka, is partly caused by the medical and biological specificity of the northern population. Significant through the contribution of genetic and physiological factors, maybe it cannot be disregarded the social background and explain northern alcoholism by these factors only. The geography of alcoholism and alcohol cost problems in Russia coincides with the prevalence of other kinds of deviant behavior, criminality, violence, and suicides. As a whole, such unfavorable tendencies are more pronounced along the southwest, northeast axis, reaching their maximum in Siberia, in the far north, and in the far east. Especially alarming is the steady growth of violent behavior in the north, with the situation of indigenous population in the north being the most depressing. Deaths by external causes, accidents, poisoning, trauma, suicides in some groups of native Northerners take first and second places in general mortality structure. The alcohol abuse among native Northerners discussed above largely results from the general situation in the community. Frequent use of alcoholic drinks in everyday life resulted in a whole spectrum of grave consequences for families. First of all, the protective role of the family concerning the physical and mental health of children is reduced. The family more and more often fails to provide social, psychological, and moral protection for its member, which results in growing frequency of suicides and other kinds of deviant behavior. The low marriage level among young native people in the northern region of Russia also correlates with growth of violent deaths and suicide rates. So loss of goal in life, lack of guides, and irritating points, the feeling of one's own uselessness and irrelevance in the changing world. These are our main causes for the crisis in personal identity. Sociocultural adaptation. The feeling of the world's instability is extended, and first of all, to the sphere of social relations, and it's accompanied by the growing social maladaptation. Northerners feel a need to adapt in the westernized environment, but too often they have no sufficient opportunities for it. This lack of opportunity or readiness to inwardly readjust oneself in order to accept and meet a new value system has a negative effect on the psychological well-being of person. It results in growth of stress, which may rightfully be called stress under modernization. The social and economic division of the population of the northern regions of Russia, which is often parallel with ethnic division, undoubtedly possesses a strong potential for generating conflict. The majority of native northern of Russia have to exist in severe economic conditions, whereas practically no correlation is observed between the income level of native communities and the migrant population. The traditional northern spheres of production cannot provide enough jobs. Like in the Khanty-Mansi autonomous okrug, for example, they provide jobs for only 27% of working natives, while the decline in fishing, hunting, and reindeer breeding, which started 30 years ago, continues. The traditional natural grounds in Western Siberia now serve the needs of oil and gas production, and the young Khanty, Mansi, and Nenets become more and more disappointed in what used to be their primary specific activity. Therefore, the most obvious reason for leaving villages are economic ones. Since economic opportunities tend to concentrate in cities, this naturally attracts people, especially those who received a better education. Among native northerners, the education level for men is only whole lower than it's for women. Therefore, it can be expected gender disproportion to develop in the native population of northern cities. And indeed, the urbanization process involves indigenous women to a greater degree. More than half of all indigenous northerners living in the cities of Russia are women, like 58%. Women more often move to the cities to study in professional schools and universities until then do not return to their villages. However, the difference in the educational level between men and women is just one of the gender differences. Women appear pre-adapted to the city environment even when they're still living in their native villages, since they constantly come into contact with elements of modernized relations and lifestyle. Besides, women are more likely to find occupations in the non-manufacturing sector, which also implies a higher level of contacts and awareness. This also facilitates the process of subsequent adaptation to the urban environment. Men, however, being involved in traditional kind of activities, spend more time in the taiga and tundra and less time in their villages, so they're involved to a lesser degree in westernization process. However, all native northerners encounter difficulties in the process of their social adaptation to the city. Surrounded by an alien culture and quite often language, they find themselves separated from their habitual environment. This aggravates the complexity of their social psychological maladaptation, and the situation is further complicated by the necessity of searching for jobs. However, the employment and unemployment problems are not so acute for indigenous city dwellers. Accordingly, indigenous residing in cities subsequently subjectively perceive their own circumstances as more favorable compared with those of the villagers. And as a result, city dwellers whose social and economic situation appears to be more stable are inclined to view their ethnicity more positively than the villagers. So, prospect for the future. Most of native northerners hope for external help from the state bodies is hardly justified in the present situation, and expecting this to gradually sort themselves out is not realistic either. However, this does not mean that the situation is hopeless. With the sensible approaches and with carefully considered choices, the native of the North have the means to meet the challenges of the inevitable process of modernization and globalization. Yeah, and yes, today is World Children's Day, which highlights in most Eurasian countries. It's a big commemorative celebration. So my warm greetings with this important day, and thank you for attention. I mean, you see these beautiful children in tundra. So yeah, it's done.
Thank you so much, Stanislav. And if everyone could join me in giving a huge round of applause, a virtual round of applause for a really amazing presentation. I learned so much, and there was just such a breadth of information. So thank you for covering so many different topics. We have many questions that have already come in. So I am going to first ask Scout if you would like to come and ask on your question.
Thanks, Victoria. And Stanislav, привет. Спасибо вам огромное за замечательную презентацию. It was very fascinating. I learned a lot and it was very eye-opening. And my question is about the number of Indigenous peoples in the Russian North that are reported, because last week we had a presenter who mentioned that the number of Indigenous peoples living in the Arctic in Russia specifically were very underreported. And I believe you also alluded to that in the beginning of your presentation. And I was wondering if you could speak on that more and if you have an idea as to why they're so underreported.
Just a bit to clarify, you are saying about underreported, like the number, it was not still revealed, like in terms of, or it means like it's still not justified. I mean, I didn't get the point. What kind of underreport, like, just could you a bit elaborate? Yeah.
Yes, the way I understood her point last week was that there were more people living in the Russian Arctic that were Indigenous than the Russian government was saying that there were, if that makes sense.
I see, I see. Good question. Like, what I can say, like, do you want to hear like a short answer or a big one?
Big.
Big,
No.
all right. So I don't know, but because you know the Russian North is pretty huge, and the situation in different regions, it's like I just can speculate. While saying about, for example, Khyber's cry, of course, clear there is a migration from the north to south, but it's mostly, I think, referred to, let's say, Slavic population, non-indigenous population, and regarding indigenous, because they mostly stick to the own settlements, and they don't have such a high level of mobility if you compare with non-indigenous people, and also, of course, economical different situations, from like logistical difficulties, like some districts, for example, I'm just saying about Khyber's cry, you can reach only by helicopter, and only by, for example, sea, through seaways, and it means that the tickets cost pretty high, and literally just people don't have money for that. So I would say the statistic can be all the time differ from the real numbers, for sure, because we have like the tendency, this is for sure, that there is a migration from the north to south, like from people by different programs trying to get some more mild and soft climate conditions, because to live in such a harsh climate zones, like with the permafrost, you need not only health, but also economical resources, of course, just to hit houses and whole infrastructure. So once you lost, for example, small medical service, it means you lost already social care for your kids, and also it's, you know, kind of chain, like people losing their comfort zone, trying to get such conditions in other districts. So yeah, I wouldn't be surprised, to be honest. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to ask Elena if you would like to come on and ask your question next.
Yeah, thank you, Victoria. Thank you, Stanislav. Спасибо вам за презентацию. I have a question actually about if you know any research regarding the connection between the indigenous health and lifestyle and the conditions of Arctic light, polar night, and polar day, especially the conditions of polar night. Right, how those conditions of low light actually influence indigenous health, and maybe there's something on cultural adaptations, etc. I know it may go a little bit beyond the scope of your presentation, but if you have any idea about this type of research, I will be very grateful. Thank you so much. And once again, thank you for a great presentation.
Yeah, Elena, thank you for this question. Actually, if you could get in touch with me later on, I just will type my contacts on the chat. I will try to help you to sort out this issue, because right now I don't have any idea to yeah, specifically about this research, but of course it's I would say pretty good in terms of, I mean, to elaborate in terms of getting correlation with avitaminosis, with in terms of especially vitamin D and other things. That's why actually I mentioned disorders with hypolactasia, because in somehow I think in terms of bringing people and because in Russian North there are different mixed couples between indigenous, non-indigenous, and of course non-indigenous. I think they bringing this I would say a new type of genotypes with less hypolactasia, and I think it's a good way at least to also work out with this avitaminose of D. So basically, at least through this extra source of the indigenous kids can get some let's say probably good health in terms of at least bone structure and whole organism. Yeah, but please, yeah, I will put my contact, and we can be in touch later on. Yeah, sure. It's a good question actually.
I will get in touch with you. Thank you very much, Stanislav.
That's great. I love seeing these connections and being able to answer unanswered questions. That's what this college is all about. Our next question comes from Susanna, who I'm going to ask to come on and ask your question next.
Excellent. Thank you, Victoria. Thank you, Stanislav. So I'm wondering whether you can speak about how climate change is affecting public health, perhaps through the changing of supply chains, for example, with food. And then the second part of that question is, you spoke at length about alcoholism in the North, and wondering whether you can talk about research that is linked to that with climate as well. Thank you.
Ooh, yeah, apparently climate change affects like in terms of logistics somehow, like there are all the time positive and negative effects. So if you think about like those Nordic regions which used to be covered by ice, I mean the seaways, of course the duration of such a ice coverage getting less, so it means there is more free access to in terms of supplying. On the other hand, of course, it means other consequences for people, like the nomadic people. Somehow they not only losing their pastures, as I told in my presentation, because of it means there is more it means more access for industrial companies, because they can expand excessively their activities in terms of exploitation and drilling for mining, just different industrial things. So basically, and of course, it also affects the existing infrastructure, like probably heard last case in Krasnoyarsk Krai with Norilsk company. It was like some, as I remember, pipeline or just fuel tank. It was big leak of oil or oil products in tundra. So like the climate change, of course, affects pretty heavily the whole Russian north. And like what we can do, we just can adaptate to these changes and be aware that also different, not only like what I can say, not only I wanted to say, but biological hazards, like different diseases, insects coming up. I mean, the transmission, the risk of transmission of different disease also getting high. So it's a complex issue. It's like to be honest, it should be, I think, examined from different perspectives. And I would like also to elaborate, if you particularly working with that, could also talk later on, if you're interested, because if you want to find some Russian researches on this topic, I'll try to help you, because I have access to different scientific bases, so we could work together. Thank you for the question. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Again, some great connections being made. We have two more questions that have come in. Dimitris, do you want to come on and ask your question next?
Yes, first of all, thank you very much, Stanislav, for the presentation. My question was more related to the pandemic, to COVID, if it actually ever, I guess it was an issue at some point for the Russian North, and so for the indigenous communities. So how did it affect them? Did you see like any differences than like the rest of the population? That's the first question. And the second one, what was the biggest challenge in terms of public health? Was it, I guess, the capacity of the hospitals? Was it the implementing some sort of measures? So yeah, what was the biggest challenge?
Yeah, I think it's one of the actual question, and thank you so much. I'm trying to remember in Greek, it should be said like, okay, I forgot. I just remember some Greek words like Ευχαριστώ, παρακαλώ. Okay, I think. Okay.
That's great.
Yeah. All right. Regarding the COVID in indigenous communities, so what's going on right now? There is already a stage with the vaccination. It's getting not so fast like we wanted. I mean, for example, as I wanted, but because some of just people, they kind of negatively consider even get vaccination. So they just by different reasons trying to avoid or just think that they're pretty safe because they like hunting or fishing, and they're quite isolated from this disease. In the same time, I would say we used to actually have good vaccination system in terms of tick encephalitis, you know, this disease, and basically people who are actually got used to for that. So for them, it's not actually big deal to get another vaccination, especially this one, which is quite well known and already promoted by mass media. So regarding measurements and procedures by authority, I would say somehow it works, yeah, because it's like I can't say that we have kind of big shortage of places for COVID patients in our hospitals, but in the same time, I would say in terms of maybe like what's the word, media campaign for promoting vaccination, I think it could be done in a better way, because still people pretty skeptical about whole not only the vaccination but even disease. I don't know if it's you surprised, but some people even still don't believe that this disease exists. So this is probably kind of a common feature for not only for indigenous, but also maybe for Greek people. So yeah, this is how it goes for right now.
No, yeah, the response seems pretty much similar. So yeah, that makes sense. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I mean the people are pretty connected through different messengers and like internet tools, and they sharing different some not only spam, whatever it is, and you know, basically all the time. I think in every community there is like a few people who don't believe or like reject even existence of such diseases. Yeah, this is kind of
Thank you very
small
much.
answer. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. We have one more question from Griffith, who asks, thank you, Stanislav. I would like to know if you see a relationship between infrastructure and development and Indigenous community health, both physically and culturally. Are there examples of communities which have benefited from increased infrastructure in their areas? Or is it a general rule that investment into an area decreases traditional livelihoods?
Mm-hmm. For sure, there is a correlation, and I think it's like in direct proportion. Like if we have investments not only in terms of bringing this healthcare system, but also in terms of bringing qualified people and who can actually spread the news and proper information about current diseases, like we already previously talked to forgot his name, the Greek person, sorry. Okay, about COVID. So basically, because among people, of course, there are many different misinformation, misconception and misunderstanding what's going on, how they can treat properly and like this disease. So basically, of course, and the current infrastructure, I mean, the Russian government trying to put investment in terms of healthcare system. In the same time, like we used to have, what was the name? Like preparation for I mean, Indigenous used to have some small preference in terms of getting high education, especially in terms of medicine. Like, for example, I'm graduate of such a system. I didn't graduate at medical university for such a system. So I've been studying in the boarding school, then automatically through, of course, passing exams, I admitted to a medical university. And right now we have unified state state exam, and yeah, basically people indigenous who live in a rural area, they, I would say, almost lost the opportunity to get high education, for example, in medicine. And because if you don't have a proper preparation, like a different additional courses in terms of biology, chemistry, and whatever it is, you can't fully prepare for this exam. And just recently I talked to president of our session, and she was saying like the chances of indigenous to get high education with such a system reduced. And basically the like people who actually will go afterwards to indigenous settlements, to communities, and gonna work as a doctors there, like it's all the time you know, people who are not actually gonna fully let's say devoted to stay there for whole their life. Of course you can't be restricted, but still as I remember, like in the past, people who had a chance to work and like get education, there were more kind of relations with the people, I mean, among with the locals, because they know this guy actually came almost from our settlements, like for example I am, and the connection between people and local doctor who was newcomer were more fully and extensively obtained. So, and right now, like the people who are coming as a new specialties in terms, I'm just saying about medicine, they just trying to work for a like small sort of time and then just leaving, and you know, it's a kind of the connection between people who are trying to get proper support, it's like getting less and less, and basically it means people probably, I would say, getting not tired, but they getting somehow connection with the reality. So maybe it's also another reason why people don't probably paying attention to the assistance of the doctor, to their advices in terms of even COVID, because they know after for a while this doctor gonna leave. So yeah, it's just a small kind of let's say explanations. Yeah. this is a small answer.
Thank you. That was a really great answer, I think. That gave a lot of insight into what I'm sure not everyone has as much insight into in the whole picture, and not just the specific, what does investment and development do in a very small scope, but how does that, impact life overall? So thank you. And it looks like I think that is our final question. So Stanislav, do you have any final comments or anything you want to say before we close out this this talk?
Actually, I've been thinking because just wanted to get back to cultural revitalization and language revitalization, because I think it's all the things connected to traditional nature management, and basically what I wanted to say, even among indigenous right now, I think there is a bad perception of such traditional nature use. I mean, I'm saying about hunting, fishing, reindeer herding, because right now, in young generation, they don't feel probably good hope for this occupation. They don't see any prestige, kind of stability, and I think it's highly important questions, because without those occupations, it's difficult to imagine how we can revitalize the outlook of indigenous in terms of language and their cultural perception. So yeah, that's why I've been finishing we need in this case different approaches, of course, particular exclusive for every ethnical indigenous group, but still I think to emphasize how we can at least to start grow up again this importance of such occupations. Because in the past, I mean, I'm thinking about Soviet times, the workers in different collective enterprises, they used to be quite respected people, and the young generation been following such a pattern. And right now, they obsessed, I think, by TikTok, by different things. Of course, there are different occupations which can be also highly valuable, but if you really think about this cultural revitalization, I think we should also mention this importance of traditional occupations. So this is my last sentence. Yeah.
Thank you. And if everyone could please join me in giving another huge round of applause. Thank you so much, Stanislav, for sharing and being so generous with your time and your insights. I think you have given everyone here a lot to think about, and I am sure you will be getting many follow-up emails with more questions and more opportunities to discuss. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much.
And thank you everyone for joining us today for our speaker. For those of you who are here, I'm gonna stop the recording.